You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Good morning, and welcome to episode 113 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. Now, it's been no secret that this season I've been highly critical of the NBA and the games that we've seen this season. The lack of competitiveness, the over analysis of drama and gossip amongst the league. But that being said, I've been pretty consistent whenever I've seen good games, I have reached out and I've done podcasts specifically so I can talk about those good games. As a fan of the game of basketball, not necessarily the NBA anymore, but as a fan of the game of basketball, I would love to see more and more good basketball contests in the NBA. I didn't sign up for League Pass just so I could be upset with the product. I want to be happy with the product. I spent my money on it. I want to get my money's worth out of it. That being said, last night did not look all that appealing. Now, before James Harden was ruled out of the Golden State and Houston blockbuster, I looked at the schedule and I thought that's the only game that really looks all that appealing to me. But what happened was, and this is a great thing about sports, is we got so many good games that last night, for the first time in a couple of years, honestly, I found myself with 2 or 3 games going on at once and flipping the audio on League Pass, and I didn't know if I was choosing the right one because there were so many great contests. And I mentioned the Rockets and Warriors. Obviously, I may as well start with that. And obviously, James Harden was injured, and when I heard about that, I didn't even want to watch it. And to give a little bit of context as to why I ended up watching it, I was invited on to do a live stream, live or Instagram TV, whatever it's called. It's a live stream on Instagram, and we're going to talk about that. So even though James Harden was out, I figured, well, I'm a man of my word, so I'm gonna still watch the game, and then I will have something to talk about, right? I'm not going to be unprepared for that. And it turned into I wouldn't say a classic, but it was entertaining. It was a total underdog. And here's a couple of things that I noticed in the first half, and I've copped a lot of heat from you guys. Well, not every single one of you guys, but some of you guys, especially the Warrior fans, you felt that the DeMarcus Cousins fit was going so flawless and so seamless. My questions were, once he starts getting more comfortable and they take the minute restrictions off him, what happens if he starts to struggle with his shot? How are you going to rein him in if you're Steve Kerr? And we saw the negative effects of DeMarcus Cousins. Because in all honesty, he should be the 4th option. I don't know if he knows how to be the 4th option. It's just that simple. The way that Klay Thompson has been playing, and obviously he's not going to... DeMarcus Cousins should never get more shots than Kevin Durant or Steph Curry, but the way that Klay Thompson, he shouldn't even be getting anywhere near the shot attempts that Klay Thompson gets. So can he play the 4th option? I don't think he can. I don't think he has it in his DNA. I don't think he knows how to be a role player, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not that it's not as seamless of a fit as we think it is. And the proof in the pudding was in the first half, the Rockets came out pretty well, but offensively they're doing a good job, but defensively they did a fantastic job. And with DeMarcus Cousins in the first half, he had a negative plus-minus rating of negative 17. That's insane for a player that's meant to be fitting in seamlessly. Because keep in mind, and it was so obvious, and this is the reason I looked this up, was in the middle of the game, was obviously at halftime, we saw the run by the Warriors when DeMarcus Cousins was on the bench. They did not play well with him. I think he was 1 from 7 in the first half. You should never, unless if you're really making all your shots, you should never be taking away shots from Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, and Klay Thompson. It's that simple, but I don't know if he knows how to play that way. And Steve Kerr, sure as hell, is not strong-willed enough as a coach to be able to re-engineer his offensive philosophy, DeMarcus Cousins that is, for this season. He just doesn't know how to do it. So what he'll do is he'll play him in spurts. If he starts to hurt his team, He'll be on the bench, but if he's on the bench, he's not helping them. He's not hurting them either, by the way. But he's not helping them. And everyone thought that DeMarcus Cousins makes his team unbeatable. Well, let's keep this in mind. And I know they didn't have DeMarcus Cousins in the previous game. But the Houston Rockets now have won their last 2 games in Oracle. Can you tell me the last time a team has won back-to-back games in Golden State? And obviously outside of the Warriors. Last time I can remember, you got to go back to the playoffs. I couldn't tell you the regular season, but you got to go back to the playoffs, the NBA Finals in 2016, where the Cavs won Game 5, and they also won Game 7. But what makes this more impressive is the first game they didn't have Chris Paul, and then the second game they didn't have James Harden. Now, also keep in mind that the Rockets, they were up 3-2. Let's not forget that in the conference finals to the Warriors last season before Chris Paul got injured. So, at what point do we actually admit that the Rockets, they might be the team that has their number? Because how differently will we be approaching all of this conversation and all of this talk if Houston if they were somehow able to keep Chris Paul on the floor, he didn't get injured, they win Game 6 or they win in Game 7. No doubt in my mind they at least take one of those games. They move on to the NBA Finals, they face the Cavs team, and they probably win in 5 or 6 games. No doubt in my mind whatsoever that actually happens. If that had happened, how differently is this conversation? And if the only thing preventing us from actually having this mindset that, hey, the Rockets are a damn good team, is a Chris Paul injury in the postseason, then we've got to start taking this Rockets team a lot more serious than what we are. All the talk, all the hype has been around James Harden and his scoring streak. What did we see last night? We saw Chris Paul. And people are saying, oh, well, Chris Paul has just returned to his, that was just how good he played. He never played this good. He was never this consistent. And what I mean by that, you can throw the stats at me or whatever. I can pull them up as well. I don't have them in front of me. But you can throw all those stats at me. But the way he controlled that pace with a team that you take into account the disparity in talent levels, Chris Paul controlled that game. And this is why I don't argue too hard when people say he's a great point guard. He's yet to prove it to me in the playoffs consistently. I'll give you that. That being said, when he is controlling a game, there is very few people that have ever played basketball that are better at that than what he is. And I'll give you an example of why I was so impressed with Chris Paul and why I think it was one of his better games. They jumped out to a big lead, they being the Rockets. The Warriors came back. They took the lead early in the third quarter, but Chris Paul didn't panic. You see a lot of players, even veterans, they panic in those situations. Chris Paul did not panic in that situation. I tip my hat to him. He played a hell of a game. The Rockets played a hell of a game. Kenneth Faried. I've talked about Kenneth Faried when he was picked up by the Rockets, and I said that, hey, I was concerned about Clint Capella and his injury, but don't be surprised if Kenneth Faried gives him some quality minutes. I didn't think he was going to be this good. Gerald Green played very well. Austin Rivers is doing a hell of a job defensively for them, providing them with energy and leadership. Who would have ever thought that? And here's something funny for you. Remember when Chris Paul was traded to the Rockets, and then Austin Rivers and Chris Paul, they had the fight, and Chris Paul tried to break into the locker room or something like that. He went through some secret entrance. It was so ridiculous. Of course, only the NBA could come up with it. Them and the WWE. Only they could come up with something like that. But look at how well they play now. Incredible stuff. I love it. I absolutely love it. I love the underdog story. I loved it. It was a brilliant game, and I enjoyed watching it. And I can't. I wish I wasn't so pleasantly surprised, but I was. So I'll give it credit. And the other thing I'll say before I move on to other games is I'm not surprised that once again the Warriors, their weakness is up against a team that is not afraid to defend them on the perimeter. If you can defend this team, this Warriors team on the perimeter, and make them work, And I know it's a regular season game, you gotta say all that, but they've looked susceptible in the playoffs to this kind of thing too. Think back to Memphis in 2015. Think to the Cavs in 2015. Think to the Cavs in 2016. Think to the Rockets last season. Anytime a team in the playoffs has the mental capacity to deal with this team on the perimeter, and what I mean by that is don't get frustrated, don't get flustered when they go on a run, things like that, and just stick to your game plan. The Warriors do look very, very shaky at times. I don't think they're when I say a great team, obviously the resume, that they may have one of the best resumes over a 4 or 5 year period in NBA history. But what I'm saying is when you look at those other great teams, whether it's the Celtics of the 80s, the Lakers of the late 80s, the Bulls of the 90s, the Lakers of the early 2000s, the Celtics of the 60s. What made those teams great is if you took away their number one option, they could beat you with their number 2 option or their number 3 option, or they could change their styles if they needed to. The Warriors, we haven't really seen that extra dimension. Now, I thought that we might start to see an extra dimension from them with Kevin Durant's defense. And when he was emerging as a defender, obviously you still have Draymond Green as a defender. You have Klay Thompson, who's not a bad defender at all. And you had other guys like Andre Iguodala. I thought maybe that could be their extra dimension. If they ever develop that, then boy, that's a scary team then. Because if their shots aren't falling, they can still shut you down defensively. I don't see that. I don't see a consistent defensive performance from this team. So once again, if you are able to constrain them, or contain them, excuse me, both are applicable by the way, but if you're able to do that to their offensive firepower, especially on the perimeter, and entice them to go to Boogie Cousins, then man, you've got a good chance of beating this team. You really do. And people may not like that because they've been told that this Warriors team is so unbeatable. Dude, they were down 3-2 in the conference finals last year. They got lucky. I hate to say this because it's not up to them, but they got lucky that Chris Paul was injured. Because if Chris Paul was not injured, they would not have won that championship last year. I'm sorry to tell you that. But they did, I'll give you that. But what I'm saying is, it's not like they've steamrolled through the playoffs back-to-back years. That were down 3-2. Let me just reiterate that. I cannot emphasize that enough. And then we see this same team beat them one game without Chris Paul, and then another game without James Harden. What happens when those two come back? Well, not those two, but when those two are healthy and available. Man, the Warriors, they better hope they don't run into them. That might be their saving grace. The Rockets may have played themselves into a position where they won't actually see them. But how about this? If, let's say, the Thunder, I know they lost, and we're going to talk about that game because that was a good game too. But just say the Thunder, they continue to surge up. And I know that might be a difficult thing because they've got, on paper at least, the toughest schedule remaining. But if they are able to move up in the standings to, say, the 2 seed, say the Rockets are the 6 seed, what does that mean? They've got Denver in the first round. Now, what does that mean is Denver, yes, Denver has looked good, and I want to be all in on Denver. I like their style, I like their balance, but playoff basketball is totally different to regular season basketball. And it might be such a huge culture shock to them because what happens if they had to play Houston or if they play San Antonio in the first round? Veteran teams that have been in the playoffs many times, they know what to expect. Denver does not know what to expect. I'm sorry, but I will put my money on Houston even without the home court advantage and the huge seed disparity. I put my money on Houston or I put my money on San Antonio in those circumstances. So we could still see a Rockets-Warriors matchup in the conference finals. It's on the cards. Now we're going to swing over to the Eastern Conference, and we're going to start the games chronologically because I'm going to go through the scoreboard, and that will be my that'll be my cue to remember because there were so many good games last night. Nets and Hornets. D'Angelo Russell, 40 points. Kemba Walker, 32 points. What a good duel between these two all-stars. Now, here's the thing when I think about Russell. I cannot help for the life of me to think how badly the Lakers screwed that whole thing up. Now, I know they thought Lonzo Ball was going to be a special player. He was going to, really be the catalyst for the resurrection of the Lakers. I get that, right? But that being said, if you've watched D'Angelo Russell, this dude can score. As I said, 40 points. And I'm not surprised by the fact that he had 40 points, by the way. I remember seeing a game up against him last season in Portland, and he tore up Lillard. And they won that game. They are now currently the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference. And he's by far been their best player. They're an entertaining team to watch. And what we're looking at is a potential matchup between the Pacers and the Nets. And I know neither of those teams are going to make it out of the second round. But, man, that's going to be a fun matchup. Because these two teams have balls. They are not afraid of anything. A lot of these guys are underdog players, especially the Pacers, when you think about it, losing Oladipo, but they're holding ground. They beat Washington by 7 points. Now, you might think, well, Washington, they suck. Yeah, you're right, they do suck. I'm not going to deny that. But if you're looking at it from a pure talent standpoint, even with John Wall being out, even with all the trades and the players that they've cut, they are still at least on par with what the Pacers are from a talent perspective. And the fact that the Pacers continue to win without Oladipo, and they relied very heavily on Oladipo, is a testament to how well coached they are and how mentally tough they are. So you're going to have two mentally tough teams squaring off in the first round. Now, as I said, neither of these two teams are going to make it to the conference finals. I get that. But the first round series, if you can just forget the fact that it's basically inconsequential. If the playoffs were to start today, and this is what this would be the matchup we would get, it would be a fun matchup. Think back to the Bulls and the Celtics in 2009, and obviously the Celtics were repeat champions. Kevin Garnett was ruled out for the playoffs, so we saw a hell of a playoff series, but we all knew that wasn't going to go anywhere. Now, that being said, they did do a lot better than I thought they would up against the Magic in the next round, and they pushed that series to 7, but they lost in 7 games to Dwight Howard, and that I wouldn't say they're totally underrated, because it depends on what side of the coin you are with it. If you're a LeBron fan, you'd say they're underrated. If you're a Kobe fan, you'd say they're also underrated. But if you're anyone apart from that, boy, it's windy out there. but if anyone else, apart from those two fan groups, you'd say they're overrated. And they're a bit of a flash in the pan. Getting a little bit off topic, so I'll get back to what I was saying, though. The Celtics and the Bulls, that was one of the great playoff series we've ever seen in the first round. But it's not the greatest, in my opinion. The greatest was actually the Clippers and the Spurs in 2015. Was it 2000? Yeah, it was 2015, excuse me. And that 7-game series was more exciting to me because I felt they were both genuine NBA championship contenders at that point. The Spurs were repeat champions. The Clippers had all the firepower in the world with Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, JJ Redick, all those guys. And that series went back and forth, but you felt like, hey, whoever comes out of this may actually go on to win the title. Of course, that didn't happen either, by the way. And one of the great implosions in NBA history, we saw the Clippers advance to the second round, go up 3-1, and then somehow lose. Well, I mean, we kind of expected them to lose Game 5 because that was in Houston. But then we saw them lose, a 15, 16-point lead with James Harden on the bench in the fourth quarter at home. Incredible. And then, of course, they lost Game 7. I remember that vividly because I lost money on that series. But regardless, keep an eye out for that. If we get that playoff series, a lot of people will probably get sent to NBA TV. We won't see a whole lot of those games, but they'll be highly competitive. And I'll be looking forward to that. Lakers and Pelicans, that was probably, quite honestly, the worst game outside of the Pistons and Heat. And what's more interesting is the ramifications of this game. The Pelicans, behind Drew Holiday, 27 points. We saw Okafor have a good game as well. Their backup center, I can't think of his name. I'll pull that up while I'm talking. Their backup center had an excellent game for them. Let me just pull up the box score because his name is definitely worth mentioning after that game. Diallo, that's the guy. 18 points, 8 of 8 from the field, 10 rebounds, 2 blocks. Played fantastic. Okafor, well, he didn't have as good of a game as I thought. He got off to a very good start. He only had 10 points. I guess he lost a lot of minutes to Diallo. But Drew Holiday and Ian Clark had an excellent game as well off the bench. I remember he hit a 3 late in that game, and he turned around to the bench to say something to the Lakers bench. Now, the Lakers, so much for that playoff mode, huh? Activating playoff mode. And then he turns around and blames his teammates again. This dude, man, he's unbelievable. He's absolutely unbelievable. Because if we just go from the stats, because I know what you guys are going to say, well, you know, he had 27 points and he had 12 assists and 7 rebounds. Well, okay, if we're just going by the stats, Ingram had 29 points. I didn't think he had a good game either. This team is broken. You see Kuzma making shots, and there's such a lack of acknowledgement. LeBron has fractured this team so badly. Him and Rich Paul, Magic Johnson, all these guys, because these young players were naive enough to buy into the LeBron James brotherhood thing and all that stuff, right? You know, or Kumbaya, we're going to be one, runners one, all this stuff. You know, they got off to a good start. Everything is going fantastic. But then what happened? He wanted to trade them all. Then they were heartbroken. It's like the first time that, you know, they've had their hearts broken, and they don't even want to make eye contact with him. They can't stand the sight of him. It's insane. And he's only got himself to blame for this. I don't want to hear that he doesn't have talent, because coming into this season, as I said before, I was preached to by so many people that the Lakers were going to have such a good season because they have more talent than the Cavs did last season. Now, once again, what's wrong with these players now? They said, oh, we've got to trade them. They're not good enough. Well, which one is it? Why is it every single time that he goes to a team, whether it's Dwayne Wade or Chris Bosh or Kyrie Irving or Kevin Love, or now this team, or George Hill and Jordan Clarkson after they made those trades at the trade deadline last season, or Kuzma and Ingram, these... It's just like, man, how can you say this? How can you go from saying that, leading into it, the hype is, this team's going to be in the conference finals and the only team with a chance to knock off the Warriors, and, oh no, this team's garbage, we got to trade everybody. It's pathetic. That's all it is. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because, that, as I said, that game was actually one of the more pathetic games out there. But what I will say is they are now 3.5 games back of the Clippers. And they are 2 games back of the Sacramento Kings. There isn't a whole lot of time left. I'm looking now. It's 59 games in the season, so there's 23 games left. They better make their move quickly. Because the 8th seed is the only seed they have. The only chance. They only have one spot to get in. So it's out of... And that's assuming the Clippers fall off. Doc Rivers is such a competitive coach, though. I don't know if he's just going to lay down. Even though it might be in his franchise's best interest, because if they do, then they keep their draft pick. If they miss the playoffs. But assuming the Clippers do fall off, there's no guarantee that the Lakers are the ones that are going to get in there. Now, if I saw Memphis up there as well, I say, well, okay, the Lakers and the Kings will probably get in. No, it's going to be one of those. It's going to be one of those 3 teams, and I don't like the Lakers right now. If I had to put money on it, I would put it on the Lakers. So that might sound contradictory. It's just that the point that I'm making is I'm not confident at all in saying that they'll actually make it in, especially when you see performances like this, or you see the performance up against the 76ers or up against the Pacers. This is not a mentally cohesive team. And look, Luke Walton will be fired at the end of the season. There is no question about that, especially if they miss the playoffs. Even if they make the playoffs as the 8th seed and they get dealt with in 4 or 5 games by the Warriors, Luke Walton is gone. And whoever has a chance to pick him up, whether it's UCLA or Chicago or like pretty much 95% of the teams out there, they're going to get a hell of a coach. He's a very, very good coach. But isn't it funny how he was, Luke Walton was considered a very promising coach as well, and all you got to do is add a sprinkling of LeBron James, because as we all know, we haven't had the full dose of him because he missed 18, 19 games, whatever it was, with that groin injury. All you got to do is add a sprinkling on him. He ruins the confidence, he ruins team chemistry, and he gets your coach fired. Great player, but if I ran a franchise and I was rebuilding, I'm not sure if I'd want him. I mean, if he wanted to sign with my team, I would sign him, and then I would trade him for younger players. Just because I just don't think that he actually makes a young team especially better. And maybe the Lakers knew that. Maybe that's why they got rid of the guys like Julius Randle. They brought in Rondo, and they brought in Beasley, and they brought in Stevenson. They brought in McGee as well, Tyson Chandler. Maybe that's why they brought all these guys in a desperate hope to try and help contain LeBron. There's no containing LeBron. He's a spoiled child. He's a spoiled child. Everything else is everyone else's fault, and he's never to blame. Now, I did mention the Kings versus Thunder. That was a hell of a game. I'm going to pull up the box score on this because I don't remember seeing exactly how well Paul George played statistically. I know Russell Westbrook had a big game. Thank you, ESPN, for that autoplay. I hate autoplay videos. If I want to watch the highlights, I'll click the highlights. Okay, Paul George, 4 of 19. Yeah, I knew he didn't play well. Defensively, he was there. He rebounded the ball well. Russell Westbrook, though, he played very, very well down the stretch for them. 41 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists. And these are the types of games that Russell Westbrook thrives in. I know I talked about how tired he is, but he kind of reminds me of a younger Jordan. I'm not saying that to I'm not saying he's going to be as good as Jordan, obviously, but just the mentality. There's no excuses with him. I mean, you hear these stories about Jordan, especially on the Olympics. He would go play, 18 holes of golf or whatever, and you go work out afterwards, and then there's a game later, and David Robinson is exhausted, the great athlete that he was back then, and Jordan just goes out there and he's full of energy and he's dominating, and it's legendary to hear that. And Russell Westbrook has that. He doesn't use fatigue as an excuse, and this is why I said a couple of episodes ago, I said that maybe it's in their best interest to sit Westbrook for some of these games and start resting him because his legs look dead. And I stand by that. But the how realistic that was, it wasn't very, because you can't get through to Westbrook because he doesn't accept that as an excuse. And here we are in a back-to-back after beating the Jazz in, double overtime the other night? Last night, I should say. So in a back-to-back after a double overtime. And, I mean, they kept pushing him because the Kings, they got off to a very, very good start in the first half. A double-digit lead pretty much throughout the first 3 quarters. And, well, I should say the first half, because in the second half, we started to see signs of life from the Thunder, and they kept pushing and pushing. They couldn't get over the hill until in the fourth quarter. They got the lead a couple of times, but they just didn't have enough left in the tank. It's just that simple. And there was a huge play. Clearly, the right call was made. I mean, I ripped the officials so many times when they screw this up. But down the stretch, Westbrook driving the lane, it was an obvious charge. I think it was Cauley Stein that took it. Obviously, I'm not sure if they complained about it or not. After the game, they definitely complained about it as when the call was made, but it was the right call. He was as set as you possibly could be in that situation. So as I said, the Thunder lost and the Kings won, so that's good for the Kings in terms of their playoff hopes. The Thunder, this is going to be a brutal stretch for them. We all know that, and that's why it was so important that they actually beat the Jazz in that double overtime game, because how shaky would things be now if they had lost that double overtime game to the Jazz, and then they lost this, if you want to call it a heartbreaker, but definitely a winnable game against the Kings at home. So, interesting. It was very competitive, though. And it's interesting dynamics moving forward for both clubs. I believe those are and I finished up watching the Jazz and Mavericks just because, I like basketball again. Usually, that's saying something, because if you guys follow me, how much I love my live PD. And I had an opportunity to go watch live PD afterwards because there was, about an hour and a half left. But no, I wanted to watch more basketball. I can't remember the last time I've actually said that after watching NBA games and my appetite was wet for it. I wanted more, but the Jazz, that wasn't that close of a game. I mean, there was the moments where Dirk made shots at the end of the fourth quarter and they started pushing and surging. But Donovan Mitchell, he's starting to really excel, and he disappointed me a little bit earlier this year. I thought he would come out a little bit more focused, but I think he's still adjusting. We've got to take that into account. This dude was a point guard in college, and he had to adjust his game. Well, I shouldn't say a point guard, but it was definitely a combo guard. But playing alongside Rubio, he's had to be exclusively their number one scoring option and not necessarily their playmaker. As they get better, though, as the Jazz will progress, you'll start to see the decline of Rubio in terms of his role. And we've started to see that down the stretch of that game as well. We saw the ball in the hands of Mitchell a hell of a lot more than we've seen usually, and they would just go straight into a pick-and-roll situation with Mitchell just dribbling the ball up court and then go into it. And that's another thing I saw as well in the Rockets-Warriors game. Horns! If you guys don't know this is basic play. It's such a great play because so many options are available out of it. With Chris Paul, you don't really see it though with James Harden running it, but when he has the ball in his hands. But Chris Paul runs horns maybe better than anyone I've ever seen, and it's a basic play where you're at the top of the key, a couple of feet back usually, but you're at center court, and you've got a screener on the left and a screener on the right, and you have the other two teammates usually parked in the corner. And that gives you so many options because you can attack either way. Whichever way they start leaning, you attack the other way. And then you force them to collapse. Now, speaking of collapsing, I did want to mention something else as well. And I had a nice little conversation on Instagram with somebody about this. Is why don't we see more of Steph Curry, Kevin Durant pick and roll situation? Because think about this. Think about how unguardable that is, by the way. The moment you get that situation, any defense, maybe in the history of basketball, is going to collapse. Because you've got two incredible scorers that command so much attention and can kill you for 30 points in a quarter, either of them, easily. And there's not a whole lot you can do, even with perfect defense. If they're going to make their shots, they're going to make their shots. They are that good. So imagine that as a dynamic, but we never see it. And then when you add on top of it the additional firepower they have, you can have Klay Thompson, who is a catch and shoot guy. Think Reggie Miller, he's like that. I wouldn't say he's better than Reggie Miller running off screens, but he's very, very good at running off screens and catching and shooting. You could have him running baseline, so if you're collapsing, where are you collapsing from? And if you've got Draymond Green and DeMarcus Cousins setting screens, oh my God. Oh my God. Because if you go away from Draymond Green, okay, if he starts shooting jumpers, and that's a win for your defense. But if Draymond Green starts to be the playmaker that he was in, say, 2015, see, Draymond Green, his effectiveness, I don't think his effectiveness is running point guard. I think his effectiveness is when he sets a screen, you can pass the ball to him, and he can then create for the other guys, the Klay Thompsons, the Iguodalas, the Sean Livingstons, whoever. You get him in that situation with that much space, he could create for anybody. And he can finish around the rim. He's a very athletic guy. And I suppose I should talk about him in his ankle injury. That was a bit of a situation yesterday as well, in yesterday's game. But I wasn't going to give them that excuse because, hey, James Harden was out. So which one is it? You can't have that excuse. Oh, well, you only have 4 All-Stars? Is that your excuse? Well, I should say 3 because, quite honestly, DeMarcus Cousins is not an all-star level player right now. So if you've only got 3 all-stars as opposed to technically none, because if you're going to say, well, Klay Thompson wasn't an all-star, so you've only got, 2, well, guess what? Chris Paul wasn't an all-star either. So there's no excuse for it. That being said, I still don't know why the Warriors don't do this. And the only thing that gets in the way of them actually running that play is probably Draymond Green's and DeMarcus Cousins' ego to just be screen setters. And I wouldn't say decoys, but the 4th and 5th options. That's the only thing stopping it. But if winning is everything, which it clearly isn't because the ego gets in the way there. Because I don't care. And what the dude was saying, I can't remember what his name is. I apologize for that. what the dude was saying was, well, maybe they're saving that for the playoffs. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they're saving it for the playoffs. Because you can't guard it. With all the preparation in the world, unless you have 7 players on the court playing defense, you're not going to stop that play. And that's why I don't rate Steve Kerr as a coach. Because you have all this talent, and yet it's still not being completely utilized, which might sound crazy. They've won 2 championships in a row. They've won 3 out of 4, but that's not really this squad. But you know what I'm saying. Anyway, guys, that's the episode for today. I enjoyed the games last night. I don't think there's great games on today. But that being said, I mean, we can't complain based off what we did see in yesterday's game. Let's have a look at who we have coming up. We've got Orlando at Toronto. That's not going to be that good. The Clippers at Denver. If I'm going to watch any game today, it will be that one. And you got San Antonio at New York. I'm not going to bother with that one. So unless if something special happens in Orlando and Toronto or San Antonio and New York, like a play going for 55, 60 points, something like that, I'm not going to bother with that. The Clippers at Denver, I'm going to say the Nuggets win that game. But here's something interesting. I just said that the Lakers were 3.5 back. But if the Clippers somehow beat Denver, and if San Antonio wins, which they should, that means the Lakers will be 4 games back with 23 to go. They've got to, and I don't think they can fix it. It's hard for me to say that because you would hope that they could sit down, but I think the rest of the Lakers are that disgusted. The only way you could possibly say that they can fix it is, who do you bench? Do you start benching Kuzma? Because there's clearly a rift. Or do you bench LeBron? There's clearly a rift between the Kuzma and Ingram, and I don't know how Lonzo Ball's going to react to all this when he comes back. Because they need him. They need his defensive presence on the perimeter. Or do you bench LeBron? That's weird. That team is so fractured. And it's funny because you look at the team like the Pelicans, clearly in tank mode. Clearly the team that on paper was hurt the most by this trade obsession with Anthony Davis. And they seem so much more cohesive, man. They seem so much more cohesive. Anyway, guys, thanks for checking out the podcast. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoy your Sunday. If you're, as I said before, it's very windy out here in the the North Midwest. I think that's the way you pronounce Ohio and Indiana. So stay safe if you're out there. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope you're enjoying the content. And I'll see you for episode 114 in the next couple of days.